like to thank the speakers before who came earlier, Daniel Best, Excellency Terence Drew, for a very stimulating and amusing session. And now I'd like to introduce the special session on the Caribbean Regional Initiatives on Debt for Climate Transactions, Transport, Energy, and Unlocking Liquidity for Infrastructure Investments. And I'm very pleased to invite my colleague Dev Bissoon, one of Guyana's finest. He's our senior infrastructure specialist at the sub-regional sub-regional office for the Caribbean. Dev, can you join us? And I think
Let me just say a few words as a context setup for this, because this was not expected to be in the program. But would you like to take a seat?
Oh.
So you have seen that this morning that Prime Minister Motley, Prime Minister Drew were already talking about regional efforts that can be really transformative in terms of energy security, water security, trade, interregional trade. And we hope, I think we collectively hope, that out of this regional dialogue there be some convergence in terms of which next steps can help us unlock that agreement that we will try to pull resources together from the readiness envelopes that all the countries benefit from to start advancing some of these agendas. So in that context, and because this is coming from discussions that Prime Minister Motley and I also had while I was in Barbados, and I was sharing with Prime Minister Motley and her team the fact that we ourselves are engaging with the Pacific, with a group of countries in the Pacific, to help them think through about the regional trade and the transport infrastructure investments that will be necessary in support of that regional trade, further integration. One of the things that these leaders in the Pacific told me when I started to first engage with them in this conversation was they realized when COVID hit how much more resilient they would have been if they were relying a lot more on a regional trade to provide supplies across the countries. So, and this is now gaining a new momentum. There are a few initiatives, and they have been very interested in this agenda for some time, a group of them. But it is now gaining momentum, and we are looking at how to help them, not just in terms, they were quite focused on the vessels, which type of vessels, and how to look at decarbonized vessels. But we are working with them in terms of thinking beyond the vessels, the whole ecosystem of infrastructure and investments that might be needed to help drive that regional trade and regional integration, and with that, of course, economic development and less exposure to external, beyond the region shocks. This is just one example of the types of structural engagements and partnerships and initiatives that can be thought for the Caribbean as well. So we will hear a presentation from my colleague Dev. My colleague Ewan, that is online as well, he has been actively involved in these engagements in the Pacific, and he will be here also available to answer questions that you might have. But to begin with and to instigate, and by the way, just to say, this is just an example. We are just coming here and sharing an example of a regional initiative that we are currently engaged on that speaks to regional trade and regional integration as an illustration of what can be done here in the Caribbean region. Dev, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mafalda. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, Honorable Prime Minister, thank you for being here. Um, First of all, and echoing what my father said, we are very pleased that you made the request for having this. And despite preparing a wicket, we had to make some adjustment. And so it's very pleasing that we have this opportunity here to share the presentation that Ewan, who is currently in Nairobi, he will present the example that we have, which is on the Pacific Blue Shipping Partnership with respect to maritime decarbonization in Pacific and small island development states. And then PM, you will come in to give us, as chair of CARICOM, you'll provide some interventions and maybe give us some insights into that. We know you spoke about debt swaps earlier, a regional debt swap initiative, debt for climate, that is, and we know that the discussion also was on energy, which PM Drew also mentioned. So we will ask Ewan, who is our energy transport and industry lead, to share with us a brief presentation, and then we will ask for your intervention, and then potentially Mafalda will come in again. So over to you, Ewan, please.
Let's hope that the technology helps.
Good morning, St. Kitts. You can hear me clearly?
Yes.
Excellent. So good morning from Nairobi, and real pleasure to be with you all, Prime Ministers, Ministers, distinguished guests. I'm going to jump straight into this presentation to just share some of what we've been looking at in the Pacific on some of the particular challenges in this space around decarbonising in the maritime space, but also very much around providing energy security, food security, water security, health security, and what are the lessons learned so far and the general direction. I will also briefly touch on the ongoing negotiations in London on the International Maritime Organization and what some of the opportunities are there. But let me please jump straight in for the sake of time. I'm going to really refer to thin blue lines. These are the maritime challenges in
Thank you very much, Ewan, for that very insightful and also detailed presentation. Now I will invite PM Mutley to provide, as chair of CARICOM, some interventions and reactions to that, and what can be the vision for this region. As we know, the Pacific Island and Caribbean share similarities, but there are also differences. But in the context of the vulnerability, climate change, the economies, how do you see such an initiative, PM Mutley?
First of all, let me thank Ewan for the presentation, and let me thank Mafalda for ensuring that we can benefit from it. I think that the region is slightly different in a number of ways, but we need to be able to see where we can find common purpose and opportunities. The reality is that at the regional level, solving the sea bridges problem has been like the pursuit of the Holy Grail in the last 50 years, certainly in the post-independence time of the region. We talk fondly of the federal maple and the federal palm, but in truth and in fact, there's been very little sea bridges that have been controlled by us, and to the extent that there is schooner traffic available, more often than not, most of it is in fact controlled from outside on the face of it. We need to get a study done on a parallel track. But without prejudice to that, the heads of government agreed last month that this issue of connectivity is so important that we just simply need to start by filling the gap, however which way it can be filled. And as recent as last week, Tuesday, we met with entities that the heads agreed we should meet with to be able to see how we can attract private sector players into the region. Because quite frankly, the regional private sector has not responded positively to taking the risk with respect to building these sea bridges. I have no doubt that the next question will be to what extent we can ensure that we can decarbonize as much as possible the movement of ships in between. As it relates to the IMO negotiations, these are absolutely critical. You heard me speak earlier about the need for dedicated financing for global public goods. Well, one of the key areas for which, and Barbados, along with France and Kenya, serves on a small committee, and there are other countries now asking to join us with respect to pursuing how best we can use global levies to be able to offset the burden on individual countries and individual sectors for being able to ensure that we can clean up, quite frankly, much of the high carbon activity that takes place. This is clearly one area. We are unlikely to see the broader ambition that was originally had for this to be able to help with the loss and damage fund and other things like that. But I believe that we can use it for what is known as not just greening the ships in their transition, but also for in-scope adaptation. In other words, coastal infrastructure. You heard just now Ewan speak about the need for some ports to ready themselves to be able to take different types of ships. We need to learn more about the technology. We need to ensure that we can show the private sector that there is a credible market that will allow them to invest. And quite frankly, let us look at the example of Trinidad and Tobago. When the Sea Bridge was first put in place there just under 20 years ago, nobody believed that they would have the numbers to sustain it. And far from that, they exploded all of the projections, largely because you're talking about untapped markets in this region for travel, from school children to church congregations, to sporting teams, to a whole host of the movement of cargo. We believe that we can reduce the prices of cargo significantly with more regular maritime bridges. But I don't only want to talk about maritime with respect to the regional cooperation. Earlier this morning, I spoke about energy. And believe you me, that is why Barbados took the initiative to get the Bridgetown unit to start to do the initial assessment. And we've asked the IFC to also build on that and to help the region begin to scale up what really ought to be a basic understanding as to what is possible, so that we can get a team of people to do the heavy lifting with respect to project preparation. And that's why, Mafalda, I am so enthused to the point where I will write every head of government with respect to, can we put one side $1.5 million of what is available to each country so that we can have regional preparation facilities, both at the level of the country, but also perhaps working with the 5 Cs, who has in fact done a lot of the work for us in getting us ready on these issues. This matter is good economics, it's good development, and it's good for the planet. And I really hope that we can see the regional cooperation on that. But then the other no-brainer, which we can almost seek to do within, or to start the process within the next few months, and at the next intersessional, I hope that we will have a paper to put before heads. Those who were around the heads of government meeting in Barbados would know that our desire to be able to amplify the agenda simply was not possible. The heads worked from 9 in the morning till 1:30 the next morning, and 9 again the next day until we finished about 9 o'clock at night. And one of the matters on the agenda that we did not get to was the regional debt swap. And we took presentations from CDB, we took presentations from CAF, we took presentations from Afreximbank, and we are aware of what the CDF is trying to do. But the truth is that we need now to have clarity as to what is possible, particularly for a regional debt swap for climate. I know the Inter-American Development Bank is also interested. I know that the Green Climate Fund is also interested. So it is really just a question, and Daniel, I hope that we can today agree on a small core team to be able to get this together and prepared to allow Barbados's debt advisors, White Oak, to also work with you. They've done the work on the first debt for climate swap for us, the first debt for nature swap before it. And what makes the last debt for climate swap so interesting, And I've brought Floris, who's been on secondment from the European Investment Bank, with me for the last 2 years. Maybe you can help make sure he doesn't leave the region, but that's a different matter. But what makes the last one we did, the debt for climate swap, so interesting is that whereas the first one, we see the savings from the interest over a 15-year period to finance the Marine Sustainability Trust. On this last one, what we've done is to aggregate the savings upfront and therefore use them to build potential by rebuilding completely a sewage treatment plant for the South Coast that will allow us this time to treat the water and allow the water then to be used to replenish the aquifers, as well as to be piped to St. Philip, where we will use it, if you know Barbados, to the eastern part of the island from the South Coast to be able to use it for non-leafy green agriculture. Now, if the region can pull that together, and in our case, our debt for swap initiative, that last one was $300 million US that we repurchased of our own debt, then to reissue with the interest savings and with the help of the European Investment Bank, the Green Climate Fund, and the Inter-American Development Bank, that we get a complete new plant without increasing a cent in debt. As I keep saying, that's like each of you getting a new house without getting no more debt and having to pay nothing more for the new house. And that's how sensible common sense it is. And we have to find a way, therefore, to remove the blockages, because this region is already a highly indebted region. And quite frankly, the fiscal space is not there. It is being eroded year by year. Last year, Grenada did not have to face what it faced with the recovery of Carriacou. Last year, St. Vincent and the Grenadines did not have to face what it has to face with the recovery of Union Island and Mayro and the other islands that have been affected. Last year, Barbados, little known fact to most of you, did not have to face what we are facing now, with having to build back a temporary fishing harbor for $16 million US, knowing full well that it is not going to last, having to confront the cost of potentially as much as a quarter billion US, 250 million US for a new fishing harbor, having to repair the Coast Guard station, having to do at least $30 million US in repair works to the port, and all of it was not discovered initially because, as you heard Mafalda firsthand on Friday afternoon, that essentially we also discovered that when the revetment was damaged, that water was going up underneath all the time and therefore eroding essentially what was the land part of the port right next to the ocean there. So that we received a significant body blow. And what does that mean? That we have to reorient our public sector investment program to be able to deal with these issues. I leave with one last point, and I hope that we can persuade the region on it, because as a policy instrument, it will strengthen each and every one of us. Last week, Monday, the budget was delivered in my country by a young, bright man, and he articulated the need to change the catastrophe fund that we've had for over 15 years into a resilience and regeneration fund. Previously, the government had seeded with very little capital that fund many years ago when it was first started, almost, 20 years in? Almost 20 years ago. And then in recent times, we had employees given in and self-employed persons 0.1% of their earnings up to the maximum insurable ceiling in national insurance. Last week, we removed all of that. And we said, look, everybody, self-employed and employees, will now give 0.25% of their earnings into that resilience and regeneration fund, and that it will not be capped by any maximum insurable ceiling. So what does that mean? That if you earn $2,000 a month, you will put in $5 a month into that. If you earn $20,000 a month, you'll put in $50 into it, rather than it being capped at $6,000 roughly as it was before. Secondly, all employers must match the contribution of their employees. So you have the employers now coming in with respect to their contribution into it. And then the major one, without prejudice to our fiscal rules, we have committed as a country now to put 0.25% of GDP, not of revenue, 0.25% of the country's GDP every single fiscal year into the Resilience and Regeneration Fund. And we've argued, just as Germany is arguing that it does not want its fiscal rules to be affected, its capacity to be able to fund its military strengthening again in Europe. And just ironically, as the Prime Minister of Spain came out a few days ago, even after our announcement too, and said, hey, in Spain's case, we don't expect Russians to come over the Pyrenees mountains. So we need you to understand that national security interest for us is cybersecurity, is climate security, and the other kinds of things that make sense to us in the region. Now, Barbados standing out on its own may well be possible of being licked down in the middle of the road. But if the rest of CARICOM agrees that we are going to, without prejudice to the fiscal rules we've established, be able to go anywhere up to 1 or 1.5% of GDP, because countries may need to do more than 0.25%, and at some point we may also do more than that, because we are still coming out of an IMF program. But anywhere up to 1 or 1.5% of GDP should be capable of being provided on an annual basis towards resilience without prejudice to what we can raise regionally in a resilience bond to be able to help the Blue-Green Bank, to be able to help the CARICOM Development Fund, to be able to help the Caribbean Development Bank. If we can do that, then I believe we can move the needle. And that's why Bridgetown 3.0 talks specifically about unlocking domestic resource mobilization, because you can't ask, God helps who? The people that help themselves. And if we're going to ask people to help us, we need to do a damn better job of helping ourselves than we're currently doing at a regional level. So maybe, Daniel, when we meet later, you may be able to, you say you only have one climate expert and they have a lot of risk assessors. Maybe 1 or 2 of the risk assessors can help us write out the rules that then can be shared with all of the different governments of the region, so that we have a unified approach towards how we treat to resilience funding within the context of our fiscal accounts, and to be able to give us that strength and resilience that we need at the national level. So I hope that, I know I've taken a long time, but I hope I've addressed all 3 areas: the transport area, the issue of regional cooperation for energy, and the issue of the regional debt swap, which is immediately possible, but at the same time, adding to those 3, the policy space that must be created now, and if necessarily enshrined in our constitutions, to be able to ensure that future citizens of the Caribbean know that the first claim on all of our earnings, on all of our production, must be first and foremost to sustain life and to sustain the countries for the long haul. Because if we don't do it, what happened to Montserrat can easily happen to all of us. And in Montserrat's case, they are struggling to recover from literally the eruptions of 20 years ago that led to a massive exodus of its citizens from the country. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Excellency PM Otley. That, I think, gives us a lot of food for thought and substantive topics for discussion in this regional dialogue. We have 3 days more to go, so it's a real great opportunity for us to discuss these going forward.
Thank you. I think that Mafalda having a presence in the sub-region, in the Caribbean region, is going to be a game changer. And not just at the level of the public sector entities, but also in terms of being able to mobilize serious private sector funding, both the long-term funding from pension funds and credit unions. We've just, for example, agreed last Monday again to free up the ability through legislation for credit unions to, use up to 25%, to be involved up to 25% in initiatives in certain key areas that we have approved. But separate from that, we need to be able to raise the awareness among our ordinary people, because our people have savings just sitting down in the banks, attracting next kin to nothing in interest rates. And that ability for you as an honest broker to be in the region and to be able to help identify the opportunities, don't underestimate the power that you will have as an honest broker to be able to say to Caribbean people, look, these are some of the things that you can do and do safely, and that we're doing elsewhere. These things matter in small societies where there is an inherent suspicion or an inherent risk-averse nature, as we spoke about earlier. So I want to thank you. I want to thank your team. And I really want to say to the rest of people here, I am not here by accident, and anyone who listened to me last week would know that I made this statement to our own Parliament last week. Without the Green Climate Fund helping us on the very difficult and vexatious issue of water in my country, I would not even know how to begin in the middle of an IMF program to start doing a lot of the heavy lifting that we have been doing. And our people are too easily turned off by complexity rather than rolling up our sleeves and determining how we're going to break it out into bite-sized chunks. So I hope that this will come out of this meeting. Thank you.
Prime Minister, thank you so much for those words and the extraordinary partnership we have. I look forward to having the presence here in the region. Many of you might not know, the board of GCF met not that long ago, mid-February, and we managed to secure a decision of regional presence. So we are starting that journey. It's not going to happen overnight, but I look forward to being able to open the office in the next year, year and a half. Thank you.